The dark space around New Haven Colony was quiet until the alien ships arrived. 200 massive vessels appeared from nowhere like angry shadows against the stars. Each ship was 3 times bigger than anything humans had ever built. Their hulls glowed with strange blue light that pulsed like a heartbeat. The ships moved in perfect formation toward the small human world that hung below them, like a blue and green marble. Admiral Kexthu stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched the human colony grow larger on his screens. His 4 arms moved quickly over the control panels while his compound eyes studied every detail of the planet below. The colony had only 3 million humans living on it. This should be easy work for his mighty fleet. The Third Fleet of the Zephyrian Empire had never lost a battle. Today would be no different. The alien commander's mandibles clicked together as he smiled. Humans were weak creatures who gave up quickly when faced with superior force. They had only been in space for a few hundred years while his people had ruled the stars for thousands. This little colony would surrender within the hour and become another prize for the Empire. Far away from the alien fleet, a single human ship moved through space toward New Haven. The UES Defiant was black as the void itself and shaped like a knife blade. Captain Jake Morrison stood on his bridge and watched the tactical display with growing concern. The ship's computers had detected the massive alien fleet hours ago, but Morrison had hoped the readings were wrong. Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez looked up from her sensor station with worry in her eyes. The young officer had been tracking the alien ship since they first appeared on the edge of the system. Every few minutes, more enemy contacts appeared on her screens. She had counted over 200 ships now, and they were all heading straight for the colony. Morrison walked over to her station and placed a hand on her shoulder. The captain was a tall man with gray hair and calm blue eyes that had seen many battles. He had commanded the Defiant for 2 years and knew every member of his crew personally. Today, he would need all their skills to save the people on New Haven. The communications officer, Pete Johnson, suddenly straightened in his chair as new signals came through his equipment. The aliens were broadcasting messages to the colony on all frequencies. Johnson's face went pale as he listened to the translation software convert the alien language into English. The enemy was giving the colonists 1 hour to leave their homes, forever. On the main screen, Admiral Kexthu appeared in all his terrifying glory. The alien commander was 8 feet tall with dark green skin that looked like armor plating. His forearms ended in sharp claws, and his compound eyes reflected the bridge lights like mirrors. When he spoke, his voice was deep and cold like winter. Wind. The alien admiral told the humans they had 1 standard hour to evacuate their world completely. Any humans still on the planet after that time would be considered enemies of the Empire and dealt with accordingly. The colony belonged to the Zephyrians now, and the humans were not welcome in this system anymore. Morrison felt anger rise in his chest as he listened to the aliens' demands. New Haven had been a human colony for 50 years. Families had built their lives there. Children had been born and raised on that world. The colonists had farms and schools and hospitals. They could not just pack up everything and leave in 1 hour. The captain stepped forward and nodded to Johnson, who opened a communication channel to the alien fleet. Morrison's image appeared on screens throughout the Zephyrian Armada. The alien crews who saw the human captain were surprised by how calm he looked. Most species showed fear when faced with the might of the Empire, but this human seemed completely unafraid. Morrison looked directly into the camera and spoke in a steady voice that carried to every ship in the alien fleet. He told Admiral Kexthu that the colony would not be abandoned and that the Zephyrians were not welcome in human space. 1 ship would stand between the alien armada and the innocent people below. The alien admiral's mandibles clicked in what might have been laughter. His compound eyes studied the human captain with interest. Only 1 ship had come to defend the colony. 1 small vessel against 200 warships of the Empire. The humans must have lost their minds to think they could fight such odds. Kexthu asked Morrison if he really thought 1 ship could stop the entire Third Fleet. The alien commander expected the human to back down or ask for terms. Most species would try to negotiate when faced with impossible odds, but humans had a reputation for being unpredictable in battle. Morrison's response was simple and direct. He told the alien admiral that 1 ship was all humanity needed. The Lao. Captain's voice never wavered and his eyes never showed doubt. Behind him on the bridge, his crew worked at their stations with the same calm confidence their captain displayed. The communication channel closed and silence filled both bridges. Admiral Kexthu stared at the tactical display showing the single, human ship positioned directly between his fleet and the colony. The vessel was small compared to his massive warships, but something about it made him feel uneasy. Commander Veltar approached his admiral with concern written across his four faces. The tactical officer had been studying the human ship with their best sensors, and the readings were strange. The vessel's energy signature was unlike anything in their databases. It seemed to have multiple power sources, but they were arranged in a pattern the Zephyrians could not understand. Other ships in the fleet were reporting similar sensor readings. The human vessel was broadcasting targeting data that covered their entire formation. Somehow, one small ship was maintaining weapons locks on all 200 vessels simultaneously. The Zephyrian computers confirmed the readings, but could not explain how it was possible. Fear began to spread through the alien fleet like a disease. Stories were whispered between ships about human berserkers who fought impossible battles and won through sheer determination. The humans had used nuclear weapons on their own homeworld during their wars. What terrible weapons might they use against their enemies? Morrison watched the alien fleet on his main screen and saw that they had stopped advancing. The enemy ships held their position at the edge of the system while their commanders tried to decide what to do. The Defiant had bought precious time for the evacuation, but the real test was still to come. News of the human challenge spread through the Zephyrian fleet faster than anyone expected. In the crew quarters and mess halls of 200 warships, alien soldiers whispered to each other about the single human vessel that dared to face their entire armada. Most of them had never seen humans fight before, but they had all heard the stories that traveled between star systems. Admiral Kexthu called an emergency meeting with all his senior commanders. The holographic projectors in the main briefing room showed images of dozens of alien officers from ships throughout the fleet. Each commander looked worried as they studied the tactical display that showed one tiny human ship blocking their path to the colony. Commander Veltar was the first to speak, and his voice carried the concern that all of them felt. The intelligence reports about humans were scattered and often contradictory, but they all agreed on one thing. When humans fought, they did not follow the normal rules that other species used. They were unpredictable and dangerous even when they were losing. The tactical officer brought up files from previous encounters between Zephyrian forces and human ships. Most of the battles had ended in human defeats, but the costs had been much higher than expected. Human crews fought until their ships were destroyed rather than surrendering when the battle was clearly lost. This behavior made no sense to the logical Zephyrian mind. One commander from the Outer Rim reported a battle where 3 human ships had attacked a convoy of 20 Zephyrian vessels. The humans should have been destroyed quickly, but instead they had used suicide tactics and ramming, attacks that took down 8 alien ships before they were stopped. The human crews had all died, but they had proven that even hopeless battles could be costly for their enemies. Another officer shared recordings from the human homeworld that intelligence had gathered over the years. The videos showed human soldiers in their ancient wars charging into machine gun fire and fighting in conditions that would break other species. The humans called it courage, but to alien minds, it looked like madness. How could you predict what a mad species might do in battle? Back on the Defiant, Chief Petty Officer Lisa Carter monitored the alien communications from her station in the ship's intelligence center. The young woman had studied alien languages for years and could understand most of what the Zephyrians were saying to each other. What she heard made her both proud and worried at the same time. Carter reported to Captain Morrison that the alien fleet was definitely frightened by their presence. The enemy crews were sharing combat footage from previous battles with humans, and the stories were making them nervous. Some ships were even requesting permission to withdraw from the battle before it started. Morrison nodded as he listened to Carter's report. Humanity's reputation had been earned through blood and sacrifice over decades of war with various alien species. Every battle where humans had refused to surrender had added to the legend. Now that reputation was working in their favor by making the aliens hesitate. The captain walked to the navigation station where Officer Dan Cooper was tracking the evacuation efforts on New Haven. The colony had massive transport ships that could carry thousands of people each, but loading them took time. Families had to gather their belongings and say goodbye to homes they had lived in for years. Children cried as they were separated from pets that could not make the journey. Cooper looked up from his displays with a grim expression. The evacuation was proceeding as fast as possible, but they needed at least 6 more hours to get everyone safely off the planet. The transport ships were working around the clock, but there were simply too many people to move quickly. Morrison felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. 3 million innocent lives depended on his ability to keep the alien fleet at bay for 6 hours. The Defiant was a powerful ship with the latest human technology, but it was still just one vessel against an armada. He had to find a way to make the aliens too afraid to attack. The captain activated the ship's internal communication system and spoke to every member of his crew. His voice was calm and steady as he explained the situation they faced. They were heavily outnumbered, but they were not outmatched. Today they would remind the galaxy why humans were feared throughout known space. Down in engineering, Chief Roy Baker was pushing the ship's reactor beyond its normal limits. The Defiant's new quantum core could produce more power than any previous human ship, but it was still experimental technology. Baker had helped design the system and knew exactly how far he could push it before things became dangerous. The engineering officer reported to Morrison that all systems were running at peak efficiency. The ship's new adaptive shielding was charged and ready, while the quantum targeting array was painting every enemy vessel with weapons locks. If the aliens decided to attack, they would find out just how deadly human engineering could be. On the bridge, tactical officer Helen Pierce monitored the weapon systems with professional calm. The Defiant carried quantum torpedoes that could crack a planet's crust and railguns that fired projectiles at significant fractions of light speed. Each weapon represented years of human scientific advancement and battlefield experience. Pierce had served on 3 different ships during the war with the Altarian Republic and had seen what human weapons could do to enemy vessels. The aliens always underestimated human firepower until it was too late. Their organic technology was beautiful and efficient, but it could not match the raw destructive power of human engineering. Communications Officer Johnson intercepted more alien transmissions, and the news was both good and bad. The enemy fleet was becoming increasingly nervous about the human ship's capabilities, but they were also starting to spread out their formation. If the aliens scattered their ships, it would be harder for the Defiant to engage multiple targets effectively. Admiral Kexthu was indeed having second thoughts about the easy victory he had expected. His fleet was designed to overwhelm opponents through superior numbers and firepower, but the humans seemed to have found a way to neutralize that advantage. The single human ship was somehow maintaining targeting locks on his entire formation simultaneously. The alien admiral studied intelligence reports about human technology and found references to weapons that could destroy entire fleets with single shots. The humans had developed planet-killing devices during their early space age and had used them against their own colonies during civil wars. What horrors might they unleash against foreign enemies? Commander Veltar approached his admiral with new sensor data that made the situation even more confusing. The human ship was transmitting a powerful signal toward human space, but they could not decode its contents. The transmission might be a call for reinforcements, or it might be sending tactical data about the Zephyrian fleet to human command. Either possibility was troubling for the alien commander. If human reinforcements were coming, then his fleet might find itself trapped between 2 forces. If tactical data was being transmitted, then future human attacks would be much more effective against Zephyrian ships and tactics. The minutes ticked by as both sides watched each other across the void of space. The alien fleet held its position, while the human ship stood guard over the colony like a lone sentinel. Neither side wanted to make the first move, but everyone knew the standoff could not last forever. On New Haven, the evacuation continued with desperate urgency, as transport ships loaded thousands of refugees every hour. Families looked up at the stars and wondered if the single human warship could really protect them from the massive alien armada that waited in the darkness above their world. The Zephyrian fleet had been holding position at the edge of the New Haven system for 3 hours, and Admiral Kexthu was growing more frustrated by the minute. His massive armada of 200 warships should have swept aside any human resistance and claimed the colony by now. Instead, they were frozen in space by a single enemy vessel that refused to move or back down from an impossible fight. The alien admiral paced back and forth across his bridge, while his claws clicked nervously against the biometal deck plating. Every few minutes he demanded status reports from his officers, but the answers were always the same. The human ship maintained its position between the fleet and the colony, while somehow keeping weapons locked onto every Zephyrian vessel simultaneously. Commander. Veltar studied the sensor readings with growing confusion and concern. His instruments showed that the human ship was running active targeting solutions on their entire formation, but such a thing should be impossible. No known targeting system could track and lock onto 200 separate targets at the same time, while maintaining firing solutions for each one. The tactical officer ran diagnostic checks on his equipment to make sure the readings were accurate. Every test confirmed what his sensors were telling him. The single human vessel had somehow achieved a technological breakthrough that allowed it to threaten their entire fleet with precision weapons fire. The implications of such capability were terrifying. Other ships throughout the Zephyrian Armada were reporting similar sensor contacts, and their crews were becoming increasingly nervous. Stories spread through the fleet about human superweapons that could destroy multiple targets with single shots. The aliens remembered that humans had developed nuclear weapons early in their space age and had used them against their own cities during wars. On the bridge of the Defiant Captain, Morrison watched the alien fleet with satisfaction as their tight formation began to spread apart. The enemy commanders were clearly trying to minimize the effectiveness of any area weapons the humans might possess. The wider their formation became, the harder it would be for them to coordinate an effective attack. Chief Petty Officer Lisa Carter monitored alien communications from her intelligence station and reported that panic was spreading through the enemy fleet. Individual ship commanders were requesting permission to withdraw from the battle zone, while others demanded immediate attack orders to end the standoff. The alien chain of command was starting to break down under stress. Morrison smiled grimly as he listened to Carter's reports. Human military doctrine had always emphasized the psychological aspects of warfare along with the physical ones. Sometimes winning a battle in the enemy's mind was more important than actually fighting. Fear could be a more powerful weapon than any gun or missile. The captain walked over to the engineering station where Chief Roy Baker was monitoring the ship's quantum targeting array. The new system was one of humanity's most closely guarded military secrets and represented years of research and development. It used quantum entanglement effects to track and lock onto multiple targets across vast distances of space. Baker reported that the targeting system was functioning perfectly and could indeed maintain firing solutions on every ship in the alien fleet. The technology was still experimental and pushed the boundaries of human understanding, but it worked exactly as designed. Each enemy vessel was painted with invisible quantum markers that would guide human weapons to their targets. The engineering officer also confirmed that the ship's reactor was running at optimal levels and could maintain their current power output for several more hours. The Defiant's quantum core produced more energy than any previous human warship and channeled that power through systems designed to maximize combat effectiveness. Tactical Officer Helen Pierce monitored the weapon systems with professional calm as she watched the alien fleet's formation continue to spread apart. The enemy ships were now scattered across a much wider area of space, which would make it harder for them to support each other in battle. Their fear was working against them tactically. Pierce had loaded the ship's quantum torpedo tubes with their most advanced warheads and charged the railgun systems to full power. Each weapon represented the cutting edge of human military technology and carried enough destructive force to cripple or destroy alien capital ships with single hits. Communications Officer Pete Johnson suddenly looked up from his station with alarm as new signals came through his equipment. The alien fleet was detecting the beacon transmission that the Defiant had been broadcasting toward human space since the standoff began. Johnson quickly ran analysis programs to determine how much the aliens had learned. Morrison had expected the aliens to eventually detect their transmission, and was prepared for this development. The beacon was not calling for reinforcements since the nearest human fleet was still days away from reaching New Haven. Instead, it was transmitting detailed intelligence about the Zephyrian formation and apparent weaknesses back to human command. The OWL tactical data would be invaluable for future encounters with Zephyrian forces, even if the Defiant was destroyed in this battle. Human intelligence officers would study the enemy ship designs and formation tactics to develop better strategies for fighting the alien empire. Every piece of information could save human lives in future conflicts. Admiral Kexthu received the report about the human transmission with growing anger and suspicion. His intelligence officers could not decode the signal, but they confirmed it was being broadcast on a tight beam toward human space. The transmission had been ongoing for hours and contained massive amounts of data. The alien admiral realized that the humans were using this confrontation to gather intelligence about his fleet and tactics. Even if they lost this battle, they would gain valuable information that could be used against the Zephyrian Empire in future wars. The single human ship was serving multiple purposes beyond just protecting the colony. Commander Veltar suggested that they jam the human transmission or move to attack immediately before more intelligence could be gathered. The longer they waited, the more the humans would learn about Zephyrian military capabilities and weaknesses. Every minute of delay gave their enemies more advantages. Other alien commanders throughout the fleet were reaching similar conclusions and demanding immediate action. The psychological warfare that had initially favored the humans was starting to work against them as the aliens overcame their fear and focused on practical concerns. The standoff could not continue much longer. On New Haven, the evacuation efforts were proceeding faster than originally expected as transport ships worked around the clock to move colonists off-world. The threat from the alien fleet had motivated everyone to work with desperate efficiency. Families were loading onto ships with only their most precious possessions while leaving everything else behind. Navigation Officer Dan Cooper reported to Captain Morrison that approximately half the colonists had been successfully evacuated so far. The remaining population could be moved within 3 more hours if the transport ships continued operating at their current pace. Every minute the Defiant could delay the alien attack saved thousands more lives. Morrison walked to the center of his bridge and looked out at the enemy fleet on the main display screen. 200 alien warships hung in space like a constellation of death, while his single vessel stood between them and 3 million innocent humans. The mathematics of the situation were simple, but mathematics had never stopped humans from fighting when they believed in their cause. The captain knew that his reputation and the legends surrounding human military forces could only delay the inevitable for so long. Eventually, the aliens would overcome their fear and attack with overwhelming numbers. When that moment came, the Defiant would have to prove that human technology and determination could overcome impossible odds. Admiral Kexthu finally made his decision after consulting with his senior commanders. The alien fleet would attack in one coordinated assault that would overwhelm the single human ship through sheer firepower. No vessel could withstand the combined weapons of 200 warships, no matter how advanced its technology might be. Alien Admiral broadcast orders throughout his fleet for all ships to prepare for immediate attack. Formation discipline would be maintained despite the scattered positions as every weapon was brought to bear on the human target. Today the Zephyrian Empire would prove that numbers still mattered more than individual courage or advanced technology. Admiral Kexthu stood before the main tactical display on his flagship as his fleet prepared for the final assault. 200 Zephyrian warships moved into attack formation with their weapons charged and targeting systems locked onto the single human vessel. The alien commander felt confident that overwhelming firepower would quickly end this strange standoff. Commander Veltar approached his admiral with the latest sensor readings, and his expression showed both relief and concern. The deep range scanners had finally penetrated the interference around the human ship and revealed something important about their enemy's true situation. The tactical officer's 4 eyes studied the data carefully before making his report. The human vessel was indeed alone, just as they had suspected, but the beacon transmission it had been broadcasting was more sophisticated than originally believed. The signal was not calling for reinforcements as many had feared. but was instead transmitting detailed intelligence about the Zephyrian fleet back to human space. Every ship position and weapon configuration was being recorded and sent home. Veltar explained that the humans were using this confrontation as an intelligence-gathering operation that would benefit their military forces for years to come. Even if the human ship was destroyed, the data it had collected would help future human fleets fight more effectively against Zephyrian tactics and technology. The enemy was turning their defeat into a strategic victory. Other alien commanders throughout the fleet received similar reports and began to understand what the humans had been doing during the long standoff. The single ship had never intended to fight 200 vessels and win. Instead, it was buying time for the evacuation, while simultaneously gathering the most detailed intelligence ever collected about a Zephyrian battle formation. On the bridge, the Defiant communications officer Pete Johnson looked up from his station with worry, as alien jamming signals began to interfere with their beacon transmission. The enemy had finally figured out what they were doing and was trying to prevent any more intelligence from reaching human space. Johnson worked frantically to boost signal strength and maintain the data link. Captain Morrison walked over to Johnson's station and placed a reassuring hand on the young officer's shoulder. The captain had expected the aliens to eventually detect and try to jam their transmission. The intelligence they had already gathered was more than enough to justify their mission, even if they could not send any more data home. Morrison turned to address his entire bridge crew as the final moments of the standoff approached. Every officer and enlisted person on the Defiant knew they were facing impossible odds, but none of them showed fear or hesitation. They had volunteered for this mission, knowing it might be a one-way trip, and they were prepared to see it through, to the end. Chief Petty Officer Lisa Carter reported that alien communications showed they were preparing for an immediate all-out assault. Individual ship commanders were receiving targeting assignments and weapons firing sequences. The psychological warfare phase of the battle was over, and the shooting would begin within minutes. Morrison nodded and activated the ship's internal communication system to address every member of his crew throughout the vessel. His voice was calm and steady as he reminded them that they were fighting to protect 3 million innocent colonists who could not defend themselves. Today they would show the galaxy what human courage and determination could accomplish against impossible odds. Down in engineering, Chief Roy Baker pushed the ship's reactor output even higher as he prepared all systems for combat operations. The quantum core was running at dangerous levels, but it would provide the power needed for their advanced defensive systems. Baker had served on human warships for 15 years and knew how to squeeze every bit of performance from his equipment. The engineering officer reported to the bridge that all defensive systems were at maximum power and the adaptive shielding was ready to absorb incoming fire. The Defiant's shields used quantum field manipulation to redirect and dissipate energy weapons, while reactive armor could deflect or absorb physical projectiles. The technology was new, but had been tested extensively. Tactical, Officer Helen Pierce made final preparations at her weapons station as she watched the alien fleet begin their attack run. The ship's quantum torpedoes were loaded and ready, while the railguns were charged to full power. Each weapon system represented years of human research and development designed specifically for fighting superior numbers. Pierce had studied the tactical data they had gathered about the alien ships and identified the most vulnerable points on each vessel type. The Zephyrian hulls were tough, but they had weak spots around the power systems and command centers. Precise targeting could achieve maximum damage with limited ammunition. Navigation Officer Dan Cooper monitored the evacuation progress on New Haven and reported that transport ships were still loading colonists as fast as possible. Approximately 2/3 of the population had been successfully moved off-world, but over 1 million people remained on the surface. The Defiant had to hold the line for at least 2 more hours. Cooper also tracked the incoming alien fleet as they accelerated toward the human position. The enemy ships were maintaining their scattered formation, which would make it harder for them to coordinate their attack, but would also prevent the Defiant from engaging multiple targets simultaneously. The aliens had learned from their earlier mistakes. Morrison walked to the center of his bridge and watched the main display screen as 200 enemy warships grew larger and more threatening. The moment he had been preparing for since the standoff began was finally here. His single ship would soon face the concentrated firepower of an entire alien armada. The captain knew that the Defiant could not possibly survive such an overwhelming assault, no matter how advanced its technology might be. The ship would fight hard and inflict damage on the enemy, but mathematics and physics would ultimately determine the outcome. 200 ships would always beat one ship in a fair fight. But Morrison had no intention of fighting fair. Human military doctrine emphasized using every advantage available, including deception, surprise, and psychological warfare. The aliens thought they understood what they were facing, but they were about to learn that humans never revealed all their capabilities until the shooting actually started. Admiral Kexthu broadcast the final attack order to his entire fleet as the distance to the human ship closed to optimal weapons range. Every Zephyrian vessel would open fire simultaneously, in a concentrated barrage that would overwhelm any defensive systems. The single human ship would be vaporized within seconds of the battle beginning. The alien admiral felt satisfaction as he watched his formation approach the target. This victory would restore confidence in Zephyrian military superiority after the psychological warfare of the past few hours. The Empire would show the galaxy that numbers and firepower still mattered more than individual courage or advanced technology. But as the Zephyrian fleet prepared to open fire, something unexpected happened that changed everything. Long-range sensors detected multiple new contacts approaching the system at high speed. The computer analysis identified the signatures as human warships belonging to the 7th Fleet that had been operating in a nearby sector. Commander Veltar stared at his sensor displays in disbelief as 8 human capital ships dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system. The newcomers immediately began broadcasting the same targeting locks that had terrorized the Zephyrian fleet for hours. Suddenly, the odds had shifted dramatically in favor of the humans. The alien tactical officer quickly calculated the new force ratios and realized that his fleet was no longer facing impossible odds. 8 modern human warships working together could inflict serious damage on the scattered Zephyrian formation. The psychological advantage had completely reversed in a matter of seconds. Admiral Kexthu felt his confidence evaporate as he studied the tactical display showing the human reinforcements. His intelligence reports had indicated that the nearest human fleet was days away from New Haven. Either the reports were wrong, or the humans had been moving ships into position while maintaining communication silence. Morrison smiled for the first time since the crisis began as he watched the 7th Fleet announce their arrival with targeting locks on the entire alien formation. The reinforcements had arrived ahead of schedule and completely changed the strategic situation. What had been a desperate last stand was now a winnable battle. The UES Defiant turned toward the approaching Zephyrian fleet and began to accelerate at maximum power as Captain Morrison made the decision that would define the entire battle. Instead of waiting for the enemy to close range, the human ship charged directly at 200 alien warships like a lone warrior rushing into an army. Every system on the vessel pushed beyond safe operating limits as the crew prepared for the fight of their lives. Navigation Officer Dan Cooper called out range and bearing information as the distance between the fleets closed rapidly. The alien ships filled the main display screen like an approaching storm cloud of death, but the Defiant never wavered from its collision course. Behind them, the human 7th Fleet was racing to join the battle, but they would not arrive in time to help with the initial contact. Chief Engineer Roy Baker's voice came over the communication system from the engine room, where he was pushing the quantum reactor far beyond its design specifications. The power core was running at 130% of normal output and generating the energy needed for their experimental defensive systems. Baker estimated they could maintain this power level for maybe 15 minutes before risking complete reactor failure. Morrison acknowledged the engineering report and knew that 15 minutes would have to be enough. The Defiant's mission was to protect the colony and buy time for the evacuation to be completed. If his ship could survive the initial alien assault and inflict enough damage, the arriving human fleet would be able to finish the job. The Zephyrian fleet opened fire first, as thousands of energy beams and plasma projectiles streaked across space, toward the charging human ship. The alien weapons lit up the darkness like deadly fireworks as every ship in the formation tried to destroy the single target that dared to face their combined might. The concentrated firepower should have vaporized any vessel instantly. But the Defiant's new adaptive shielding system performed exactly as designed by absorbing and redirecting much of the incoming energy. Quantum field generators created barriers that bent space itself around the ship, while reactive armor plates shifted to deflect physical projectiles. The human vessel shuddered under the massive bombardment, but continued its charge toward the enemy formation. Tactical Officer Helen Pierce monitored the shield strength indicators as they dropped steadily under the alien assault. The defensive systems were holding better than expected, but they could not absorb this level of firepower indefinitely. Pierce estimated they had perhaps 10 minutes before the shields collapsed completely and left them vulnerable to enemy weapons. Morrison ordered Pierce to return fire with everything they had as the Defiant entered optimal weapons range. Quantum torpedoes launched from the ship's forward tubes while railguns fired solid projectiles at significant fractions of light speed. Each weapon carried the destructive power of human engineering and scientific advancement focused into instruments of war. The human counterattack was devastating in its precision and effectiveness. Quantum torpedoes struck alien ships with the force of small stars, while railgun projectiles punched through their hulls like they were made of paper. Pierce had targeted the most vulnerable points on each enemy vessel, and her accuracy was deadly. 12 Zephyrian ships suffered critical damage within the first minute of combat. Admiral Kexthu watched in horror from his flagship as the single human ship carved through his formation like a knife through soft tissue. The concentrated firepower of dozens of his vessels seemed to barely slow the enemy down, while their return fire destroyed ship after ship with terrifying efficiency. This was not how space battles were supposed to go, Commander Veltar reported. Massive casualties throughout the fleet as more alien ships fell victim to the human weapons. The enemy vessel was using some kind of advanced targeting system that allowed it to hit weak points with impossible accuracy. Their shields meant nothing against weapons that could strike reactor cores and command centers with every shot. The psychological impact of the human assault was even more damaging than the physical destruction. Zephyrian crews had never faced an enemy that fought with such desperate ferocity while showing no concern for their own survival. The single ship was attacking an entire armada with the fury of a cornered predator. On the Defiant Bridge, Communications Officer Pete Johnson monitored alien fleet communications and reported that panic was spreading through the enemy formation. Individual ship commanders were requesting permission to withdraw, while others reported critical system failures from the human attack. The alien chain of command was breaking down under the stress of unexpected losses. Chief Petty Officer Lisa Carter confirmed Johnson's reports from her intelligence station as she listened to increasingly frantic alien transmissions. The Zephyrian fleet had expected an easy victory over a small human colony, but instead found themselves in a brutal fight for survival. Fear was replacing confidence in the alien crews. Morrison felt grim satisfaction as he watched his ships' weapons tear through the enemy formation. The Defiant was taking heavy damage, but it was giving far better than it received. Every alien ship they destroyed was one less threat to the colonists below, and one less enemy for the approaching human fleet to face. The captain activated the ship's internal communication system to address his crew as the battle reached its climax. His voice carried throughout the vessel as he reminded every person aboard that they were fighting for more than just military victory. They were defending innocent families and showing the galaxy that humanity would never surrender when protecting its own people. Down in the medical bay, Dr. Susan Kelly treated wounded crew members as the ship shook under repeated alien attacks. The medical officer had served on warships before, but had never experienced combat this intense. Hull breaches and system failures were causing casualties throughout the vessel, but every injured person insisted on returning to duty as soon as possible. Chief Baker reported from engineering that the reactor was approaching critical levels, and several backup systems had failed under the strain of extended combat operations. The quantum core was running so hot that containment fields were beginning to fluctuate dangerously. They needed to reduce power output soon or risk a complete meltdown. Pierce announced that her ammunition supplies were running low, After the sustained bombardment of alien targets, the quantum torpedo tubes were down to their last few warheads, while the railgun capacitors needed time to recharge between shots. The Defiant had inflicted massive damage but was reaching the limits of its combat endurance. As if summoned by their desperate need, the human 7th Fleet finally arrived at optimal firing range and added their weapons to the battle. 8 heavy cruisers and battleships opened fire on the scattered Zephyrian formation with coordinated precision that spoke of years of training and experience fighting together. The combined firepower of 9 human warships proved too much for the already battered alien fleet to withstand. Admiral Kexthu watched his tactical display as more ships reported critical damage or complete destruction. The battle that should have been an easy victory had turned into a disaster that would haunt the Zephyrian Empire for generations. The alien admiral made the only decision possible under the circumstances and ordered his surviving ships to retreat immediately. The 3rd Fleet had been decimated by human forces that seemed to fight with supernatural determination and advanced technology. Staying longer would only result in more unnecessary losses. As the Zephyrian Armada fled the New Haven system captain, Morrison finally allowed himself to relax for the first time in hours. His ship had survived impossible odds and protected 3 million innocent people from alien conquest. The evacuation was complete, and the colony was safe thanks to the courage and sacrifice of his crew. Communications Officer Johnson reported that Fleet Command was already broadcasting news of the victory throughout human space. The story of how one ship had faced 200 enemies and held them off until reinforcements arrived would become legend. The battle would be remembered as proof that human determination could overcome any odds. Morrison looked around his bridge, at the crew who had made this victory possible. Every person had performed their duties with skill and courage, despite knowing they faced almost certain death. They had shown the galaxy what humanity was capable of when fighting for something they believed in. The captain activated the ship's communication system one final time to address his crew and the arriving fleet. Today they had reminded the universe that humans would never back down from a fight when protecting innocent lives. The human way was simple but effective. When faced with impossible odds, charge forward anyway and trust in courage to find a path to victory.